We're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 2016 Global Dialogue on Waste. This is the fourth consecutive year for our Global Dialogues on Waste, and we're very proud to have done this for 4 years. And last month's theme was oceans and plastic pollution, but this month we're shifting to consumption and climate change. And next month we'll be making a case for waste, and the last month, September, will be the future of waste management. And today, as part of this theme, the first panel is on economic instruments for reducing consumption and therefore climate change. And today, this panel is being co-organized by Be Wastewise and Eunomia Research and Consulting. And special thanks to Peter Jones for making this panel possible. And let me welcome Chris Sherrington and Tim Elliott. Both are consultants at Eunomia for this panel. And to start with, Chris, could you please introduce yourselves, and then we can get into questions after Tim's introduction.
Yeah, hello, I'm Chris Sherrington. I'm Principal Consultant here at Eunomia Research Consulting, based in Bristol, in the UK. I'm an economist, and a lot of my work looks at the use of economic instruments to prevent waste, encourage recycling, and increasingly looking at the use of these instruments to prevent litter and marine litter.
Thank you, Chris. And Tim?
Yeah, my name is Tim Elliott. I'm a senior consultant at Eunomia Research Consulting. I've been here for about 9 years and have focused on policy analysis, so cost-benefit analysis of a range of policies, including landfill taxes, producer responsibility schemes, and deposit refund systems, to name a few. So I have quite a bit of experience in this area.
Right, thank you. And let's start with something which is hotly debated, which was banning stuff, and mainly banning plastic bags. So maybe I can go tabloid on both of you. And ask, banning plastics, yes or no, Chris?
I think a ban is not always the most sensible approach. And I think on taking plastic bags or single-use carry bags as an example, I think what Wales have done really well here is put in place an economic instrument, and Scotland have done the same, England have done it slightly differently. You put a charge on these items, and that has reduced consumption significantly, but it still allows people to have the choice whether to use them or not, but they value them to a greater extent. So these things, you don't find them going around as much as they were before. But the other side of it is it raises money. So in Wales and in Scotland, and now in England with the charge here, this kind of instrument can raise quite a bit of money. What's working well from the waste prevention side in Wales in particular is that it's looking at plastic and paper. It's both types of single-use items. So it's squarely on waste prevention rather than focusing on one type of material. So I don't think bans are always the answer. There may be some exceptions, there are some exceptions to that, but certainly on carry bags.
Okay. Okay, all right, Tim. How about you?
I think Chris is right in Europe and maybe America. I think if you go to some other economies, then perhaps the ban actually might be a little better. I know in India, for example, they banned the little packaging for the tobacco chews they have in some states, and that has had a pretty dramatic effect on the amount of plastic litter in the environment. And I think in some economies, the culture will much more easily accept being basically told what to do. I think in some other countries, perhaps in the UK and other countries, then an economic instrument is a bit more palatable for the general public, and as Chris said, can raise some revenue. So I'm not totally against bans. I think it does depend on whereabouts you are in the world.
Right. So no, yes or no. But I think in the rest of the world, I think it also depends upon the ability to implement the ban. For example, like you mentioned in India or other developing countries, you do not have enough resources to implement the ban. You know, even if you did ban something. So
and I think one of the things with the charge is that when we saw this in England, it can save the small shopkeepers. It can save the money included in the charge, because it was a 5p charge, which is more than it costs to supply the bags. So they can keep that money. So that they are saving money. But in England, the way it was done was that the small retailers were exempted from this charge, even though they actually lobbied to be included in it. So one of the problems with if you had a ban, you might well have to supply paper bags for free to your customers, if that's permitted. That can end up costing people more, because paper bags might cost more than plastic carry bags. So there's a range of impacts depending on the policy instrument chosen.
Right, right. And we also have this whole debate about, you know, whether plastic is a better packaging material or paper is a better packaging material, depending upon, you know, what kind of uses we're putting it to. And that also has a huge impact on, you know, climate change, depending upon which material we use. Tim, do you have anything to say about, you know, that?
Some of the studies that have been done on this, do give different results, and it does depend to some extent upon what type of carbon. If you're looking at a climate change impact, what type of carbon you're looking at, and some studies won't include the biogenic carbon, which is carbon from plant material that's sort of grown. You know, for paper bags, the trees are assumed to have grown relatively recently and have absorbed carbon already. So the carbon benefits are not necessarily the same as plastics, so you get quite different results. So in some cases it looks like it's actually not a very good idea to stop using plastics and to use paper bags. But you know, our view is that you should take biogenic carbon into account, because it's, you know, any emission over the next 20 years is going to be really damaging to the climate, if I can put it that way. Even if it's biogenic or non-biogenic. So I think using paper bags would be better from that perspective, and also depending on the final disposal. You know, if you're putting plastic bags into incinerators, for example, and burning plastics, that's probably one of the worst things you can do.
Right, right.
So, as we're seeing with the problems with marine litter, marine plastics in particular, they're arguably, if you were to focus too narrowly on carbon impacts, this is as Tim said about the end destination, if you like, where these things end up. And of course, paper bags don't cause the same harm in the marine environment as plastic bags do. But it's not necessarily a straightforward task to account for that within the metrics that we use.
Right, right. So they can decompose and not pose any harm, as opposed to plastic bags that just stay in the environment. And I think people say that the first plastic that was created still exists in the environment with the decomposing. So yeah, I think just FYI. And all right, so let's talk about extended producer responsibility. You know, consumers paying for, you know, their packaging at the purchasing moment of purchasing. So, Chris?
Yeah, there's
good or bad?
The concept. I think the concept of extended producer responsibility is one that's absolutely at the heart of the circular economy. If we want to have products that are designed to be durable, to be recyclable, to minimise the external costs of the product, or packaging indeed, we need end-of-life management costs to be incorporated into the design considerations. Now, at the moment, just to take European member states as an example, the UK is doing this in quite a different way to a number of other member states, and it's difficult to get precise figures, but it's thought that there's a study from the Commission taken 2 years ago that suggests in the UK only about 10% of the net costs for the waste management for packaging is covered by the producer. So the rest is covered by the taxpayer. So these costs should be on the consumer by the producer rather than the taxpayer, which is citizens. So we're not all consumers of these items. So the concept is a sensible one. It's in the way it's implemented. Differences in approaches can have quite different effects.
Right. And Tim, any thoughts on that?
In terms of extended responsibility for packaging, for example, I agree with Chris that extended responsibility is absolutely key. It's really important to make sure that the financing is right for waste services, especially for recycling. And actually, once it's been implemented and in the industry and businesses get used to it, they do kind of see it as a bit of their corporate social responsibility, and they get over the shock of having to pay some additional money. Over time, it becomes part of the products, and actually, I think they would prefer. We were doing some work in Southeast Europe at the moment where there isn't much EPR, and the producers are almost a bit, they're a bit confused why there isn't. Why they haven't put regulations in place. So I don't think it's as negatively seen by industry as some people think. But in terms of waste, it's important to make sure that the financing through the EPR schemes and the way they're set up doesn't impact on other municipal services. So, for example, in Europe, often separate producer responsibility organisations are set up, and that causes a mismatch in the finances between the recycling side and the disposal side, because the organisation that's doing more recycling doesn't benefit from the avoided disposal because they're different organisations, and it's absolutely key mechanism in terms of improving recycling is to make sure that the person who's doing the recycling can get some benefit from the avoided disposal. So there are some issues to make sure that we need to address in the implementation of EPR to make sure it's really successful. Yeah.
Right. And talking about finances, Chris, we were talking about how charging a fee for certain bannable items, which would otherwise be instead of banning something, charging a fee would be better in most cases. So how much fee? How do we determine how much fee should be charged? And you mentioned 10 pence. Is that good, or should it be more to actually make a change in a consumer behavior?
It depends what you're trying to achieve. Just to go back on the extended producer responsibility discussion, it's important to try and have some differentiation of the fees between different producers of different products, just to give the individual firms an incentive rather than just a flat fee across all. To give them
Could you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so if one firm designs a product that is maybe much lighter on weight or much more recyclable or much easier to recover through recycling, if it's just a weight-based fee, that might not be recognised. If they've designed it with certain materials that can more easily be recycled at lower cost, that should be reflected in the fee that they're charged, rather than just purely an average fee based on
flat fee.
Yeah, but looking at particular items for carrier bags, if it's something that's people are used to getting for free, if you suddenly charge 5 pence, that's an infinite increase. If you're looking at, so that has had an effect. We've seen 8% reductions in consumption in the UK. And taking another item, you could imagine perhaps single-use disposable coffee cups. Be something that, to achieve a similar reduction, you'd have to put a higher charge on than 5p, because in the UK you pay maybe £2 for takeaway coffee in the morning. So 5p on top of that wouldn't really incentivise behaviour. Starbucks in the UK is offering a 25p discount for bringing your own reusable mug. So maybe it's still the order of 25 pence, where people would start to think, well, hang on, over a week, this starts to add up. and that kind of level will bring about behaviour change. But yeah, it's, I think for that kind of thing, the fee has to reflect the proportion to which it is additional to what people are paying at the moment.
Right, right. Tim, thoughts on that?
Yeah, as Chris said, you know, there's been some significant reductions in carrier bag use just for 5p. I think it depends on the change in behaviour that the consumer has to adopt. So for a carrier bag charge, all you have to do is remember you're already going to the shops. You just have to remember to stick some carrier bags in your pocket. If you were talking about maybe a deposit refund scheme on beverage packaging, for example, you have to do something a little additional. You have to go and queue up in front of possibly a machine or a return point. You have to spend a little bit additional, you know, amount of your time to participate in the scheme. So 5p may not be enough. 20p for beverage containers might be better, and there's evidence that way. So I think that the point is that consumers do have some inbuilt sense of a value of their time, and if they feel that they have to do an additional 5 minutes, 10, 15 minutes of their time, then they internalize somehow what that value should be. So really, in terms of these instruments, the greater the amount of time the consumer is having to put in, really the greater the incentive.
Right, that's interesting. And while we're still talking about economic instruments, and given that there is a lot of rage and fury with, you know, a low economic status on both sides of the Atlantic, which is fueling multiple political decisions, what kind of impacts do these economic instruments have on small businesses, or, you know, on lower people in the lower economic status?
Well, I think, I mean, taking deposits as an example, at the extreme for homeless people, it can be a source of income. In Germany and in Denmark, where you have a deposit scheme around litter bins, you can sometimes find a kind of a collar, so something that people can put their bottles into if they value their time so much that they don't want to go back to the shop to put it into, or to wherever to put it into a reverse vending machine. They can leave it there. So homeless people will, you know, whoever wants to pick them up, children, for example, would pick it up. So in that respect, it could be seen as more of a distributional benefit to those on low incomes. And also, it's again on beverage containers. There's a great difference between those who consume a lot and those who consume a little. So if, and at the moment, we're all just paying a flat fee for the litter collection and for the recycling of waste in this way, have all waste. So if you're starting to move more towards a consumer pays rather than a citizen pays approach. So if we're looking at fairness, I think matching it more closely to the amount an individual consumes is fairer than the current approach in the UK, where we don't have a point.
Right, right. And do these schemes actually, I mean, when these schemes go to the court, they generally do get opposed based on arguments that it impacts the costs for you know, people on the lower economic strata, you know, the middle income and then the lower middle income. So can we, you know, are those substantial arguments, or are they just, you know, made so that they could oppose these?
I mean, there are a range of instruments we're talking about, and different ones would have different impacts on the lower sort of parts of society, I suppose. But the two we talked about so far, plastic bag charge, it costs probably about £1, you know, for a Hessian bag or jute bag, and you can use that for life. You know, £1, even for someone who's on a very low income, is a very, you know, small amount. So it doesn't seem to make, an argument that it's severely impacting on people with lower wages doesn't seem to make sense in that respect for the carrier bag charge. But for deposit systems on beverage packaging, you pay a deposit. This is often given as an argument by the packaging industry and others for not implementing deposits, because people would have to pay the deposit, and by paying a deposit, that means that the price would go up and therefore consumption would fall, and they're obviously worried about consumption falling. From an environmentalist, consumption falling might not be that bad actually, but for Coca-Cola and Pepsi, consumption falling is not that great. But in fact, a deposit is a returnable deposit. So the evidence is that although it's more of a cash flow issue rather than actually an impact on wages and the amount that you've got in your pocket, because if you take all your bottles back by the end of the week, you can get your deposit back. So again, I don't think there's a really strong argument that those two particular instruments really impact on people with lower wages.
Right. So I think we're discussing two different items, like Chris mentioned before the call started, which is instruments which prevent waste and instruments that incentivize for the waste to enter the circular economy supply chain. So Chris, could you talk about these two different types of instruments and then maybe distinguish between them?
Yeah, sure. In broad terms, if you're looking at preventing waste, something like a levy, as we've discussed, on carrier bags, or a levy or charge, or a charge on single-use coffee cups to encourage people to bring their own, that will be waste prevention. Deposits, return schemes are typically not preventing waste, but they are increasing recycling and reducing littering. Now, a key distinction is between whether it's what's called a one-way deposit or a two-way deposit. Two-way deposits are, we can call this the old-fashioned way of having a refillable, usually a glass bottle or a thick plastic bottle. So you return the bottle, it's washed and refilled. Now this still takes place in Germany. I was there in autumn, and you have this kind of two-way deposit system. And it works alongside the one-way deposit system, which is the new, or any new deposit system coming in tends to be a one-way deposit. So you have the bottles are then recovered or they're collected for recycling. So it's not actually waste prevention. It's refillables, it's waste prevention. But if it's just encouraging recycling, it's not a waste prevention measure. But what it does do is you get a really good quality stream of material, which achieves high levels of recycling. It's what's called closed loop recycling, so the plastic bottles are made back into plastic bottles, and then converted into lower value items. Right.
That's Tim. Do you have anything to say about that? The two different types of economic instruments. Any thoughts on those?
Just a couple of points. We've done some work before on packaging tax, which is really the explicit purpose of packaging tax is to incentivize producers to reduce the quantity of packaging that they use, but also possibly the type of packaging. So we had designed a tax based upon the carbon the carbon impacts of different packaging types. So at the margin, it might mean that producers are reducing the amount of packaging, so they're preventing waste, but they also might switch between different types of packaging to avoid the charge, which will also give climate change benefits, so prevent climate change emissions as well. That's one example of a prevention type.
Right. All right. So talking about different types of packaging, let's talk about styrofoam, which has been again a hot button issue for cities across the world. Right. What to do about styrofoam, and also to recyclers, and of course, like Tim mentioned, landfillers. Everyone, it's been a issue for everyone. So what do we do with styrofoam? What kind of instruments are available out there, for styrofoam specifically? And if we have to ban or do something about it, is it right to target single items like this?
Well, New York put in place a ban on styrofoam, but that was overturned.
Overturned, yeah.
Which we all know. And I think you probably know more about this than I do living there, but my understanding is it's on the basis that it wasn't cost effective to recycle it, or there wasn't a market for it to be recycled. That was the basis on which the ban was implemented. And then money was found from the producers to cover the costs of the collection and recycling. So you are still able to buy takeaway items in styrofoam.
Right.
DC, I believe, has implemented a ban in a slightly different way, on a slightly different rationale, based, I believe, on the environmental impact of styrofoam. And I think I may be wrong on this, but the characteristics that make it such a useful material, that's very lightweight, very automatic, also not good in terms of filling up this bins quickly and getting blown around, therefore ending up everywhere. It's a very tricky one, because if you look just at the carbon metrics, it might be preferable to other materials, but again, the more we find out about the impacts of plastics in the marine environment, I think
and on the health of people.
And yeah, I mean, our focus recently has been on microplastics at sea being attracting other pollutants to them and then being ingested in the food chain. And this is an area where our knowledge is increasing, and the signs aren't particularly positive. We're undertaking a large experiment, really, in terms of plastics in the marine environment. I think the rationale for considering such measures on particular materials will, I'd imagine, grow stronger as we learn more about their downstream impact, which ultimately comes to us, seeing as we do consume much of, in terms of we are top of the marine food chain in many ways.
Right. Tim, can you talk about the instruments that are available to, maybe prevent the production of styrofoam, the use of styrofoam, sorry?
Well, you could, I mean, we have in the UK some voluntary commitments from the retailers to reduce the amount and the type of packaging that they use. And it has actually been fairly effective in reducing the amount of styrofoam. Often when you go to shops now where you have things delivered, what's surrounding your TV is like an impression, like an eggshell, like an egg box type a container. And it obviously works just as well as styrofoam and maybe require a bit of additional design. But there definitely seems that it's possible. But in terms of economic instruments, the point I made before was about a resource tax or a product tax, and I guess you could call styrofoam a resource or a product. But if you put a tax on it and slowly increased it over time to give if you announced an increase in the tax over a period of maybe 5 years or something, that would show a very strong signal to the market that they should be doing something to move away from styrofoam, and that additional cost would then be able to let them go to their boards of those companies and say, look, we've now got a business case for investing in a cardboard packaging. So yeah, a product tax on styrofoam would work, I'm pretty sure, pretty well.
And I think it's another example of where you had just a flat weight-based charge as part of producer responsibility. Styrofoam, expanded polystyrene, not with styrofoam, which is a trade reduces. But if it were just based on weight, you'd imagine that it might not cover the full costs of subsequent end-of-life collection, and disposal.
Yeah, so the point would be is the tax would have to be at a significant level to incentivise or to make alternatives cost effective, and include the additional change in processes and whatever technology they might need to produce the alternative types of packaging.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that has been demonstrated really well here in the UK is the landfill tax is a really good example of how to put in place an economic instrument that drives change over a considerable period of time, because the tax was announced, the levels were pre-announced, and the rate of subsequent increase was made clear to investors. So you have, I think it's 5 years hence, or was it beyond 30 years? There was, I forget the exact timescale, but it was made quite clear that it would go up. The most recent tranche was at £8 per tonne for each year jumps. Okay. So it gives you a really strong steer as to where the price is going, where it's going to end up. The fact it's not going to drop down below that. So that gives investors confidence. I think the same thing when you're looking at changing behaviour, perhaps changing materials, production processes. From a policy-making perspective, longer the
time horizon.
Yeah, if you can give a clear steer as to the way that the cost of this will change over time.
Right. Right. I think long-term policies do help a lot, and actually making sure that people understand that this is how the future is going to be. Therefore, we have to change accordingly. Great. And so, talking about product taxes, and I just wanted to mention that coming to expanded polystyrene, I actually learned more about it. Of what's happening in UK and San Francisco through one of Eunomia's blog posts. So just wanted to mention that. Thanks, Eunomia. Eunomia is a blog which is operated by Eunomia. And great. And also, since it's weight, are the landfill taxes weight based, like you mentioned?
Yes.
Yeah. They're nearly always weight based, but they can be based upon things like calorific value or the biodegradability. How much it's like to ferment. So, but mainly weight based.
Okay. I wanted to mention that if it's weight based, then for materials like styrofoam, 1 ton must look like a skyrise. High-rise building. Yeah. All right. So talking about product taxes and extended producer responsibility, where it has been passed, if you see that some communities or states around the world have been, successful in doing this, and they could get, the corporate support to do extended producer responsibility. But then in most other cases around the world, we see that corporates and they're not very encouraging of such instruments, and in some cases they also oppose them vigorously. So do you want to kind of try to distinguish what might be happening in one place and the other place? What's difference between these two?
Well, I think it's quite understandable if you're a business, if you make products and you're operating in an area where you do not have to pay the end-of-life management, you'll effectively be free riding. You'll be externalising those costs to wider society, which I imagine will be either, depending on the waste infrastructure in place, will either be ending up inappropriately managed, or the management will be paid for by the public, not necessarily by consumers of your items. So, from a commercial perspective, you can imagine why such companies wouldn't want to have producer responsibility in place. That said, once it is in place, there'll be a difference between the best performing firms and the worst performing firms. And those that are better performing will be the ones who will benefit most from a kind of fee structure that's differentiated based upon the quality of the product you put on the market. So it's definitely not a case that, as Tim mentioned, in Southeast Europe work we're doing. There's obviously an awareness that this is a cost that arguably should be borne by the producers, by the consumers. That's not something that firms are necessarily seeking to avoid. So not always the case.
I think that the implementation of it seems to be has been quite successful in Europe, and it's been more opposed in North America. It's been fairly successful in some of the Asian countries. Singapore and others has been reasonably successful, if you ask me. But I think on reflection in terms of Europe, one of the reasons it's been successful is because it's a common requirement across a huge market. And in North America, there's often different requirements and different materials and things from state by state. And what we find actually is that producers, they don't like that much difference, and it's a burden for them to understand all of the different requirements in various countries and also in various states within one country. So, for example, in Europe, Coke or Pepsi, they have to understand the EU Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive, and they need to employ a consultant to tell them what it means once. But if you imagine Europe, which wasn't the European Union, which had 28 different countries, hopefully I'm not crystal, gazing into the future, but Coca-Cola and Pepsi would have to employ a consultant for 28 times to understand what was going on, and they would oppose any type of EPR much more vigorously in that type of environment. And I think that's why they do more vigorously in North America. So maybe a lesson for possibly North America is, I know that the powers are at the state level, but if there could be some federal level minimum requirements on EPR, so that producers could understand across the whole country, then it means it would be much easier for them to be part of the scheme, and I think that they would then see it as less of a burden. That's one reflection.
Interesting. And now let's talk about pay as you throw, or as they call it in New York, they call it pay as you save. Save as you throw. Pay as you. Okay, sorry. All right, so let's talk about pay as you throw. Chris, what kind of situations can this economic instrument be used during, and what's the intended purpose of such an instrument?
The intended purpose is to reduce waste, and you do already see this on the commercial waste side. Firms might be charged by the volume of the bin, sometimes by the weight of what they throw away, sometimes by the frequency of their collection. So the way it's done at the household level as well in a number of European locations is typically by weight, so you pay by how much you're throwing away, but sometimes it's a combination of weight, volume and frequency of collection, and having all those three together is what you want to provide that ongoing incentive to minimise production of waste. So you would, the way you do it is to charge more per kilogram of residual waste. So this is the stuff that's left over once it's taken out all the recyclables. You still want to charge for your recycling, but not so much. So and one of the important lessons from where this has been put in is you want to make sure that of the fee that's paid by householders, there's a certain amount is a flat rate fee to cover the costs of the collection system itself. If you have it just 100% based on the amount thrown away, it has caused problems in some cases where local authorities don't have enough money to operate the system. So you need to get the balance between the fees that cover just the existence of the collection system and those on top, which will cover some of the costs of disposal as well. But it is, in the absence of pay as you throw, for the household, the marginal incentive to prevent waste is zero. You're not faced with that cost when you buy stuff. Obviously, if you buy stuff, there's a cost associated with it, but you don't get that incentive to reduce waste. And it does seem crazy that looking around, here in the UK we pay a flat fee for it, but you wouldn't do the same for your electricity.
Right.
You wouldn't pay the average of what one in your neighbourhood uses, because the incentive there would be just to consume a bit more. Yeah. And the same for water. People are getting increasingly used to paying what what they use for their water. But it's seen as normal for waste, which I think is a bit of a disconnect there.
Right, right. And I think here there is a difference between the waste management sector and other service sectors like electricity and water. And we see this even in developing countries where people want electricity and water, but then they don't really pay for those, but then they don't really pay for the waste management service to remove waste from their neighborhood. So I think there is a very basic difference between our sector and the other service sectors. But
yeah.
Do you have anything to say about pay as you throw? And also, were there instances where either of you worked on a project where in one instance you had to suggest pay as you throw, and in another you had to say no to pay as you throw?
I'm not saying no. I don't think we've. It's interesting. In the UK, we're not actually allowed to put in pay as you throw.
You're not?
No. It was under the Climate Change Act of 2006. I think it was permitted that local authorities could come forward and trial these kind of charging schemes. None of them did, but the potential was there. But then a former community secretary said that this is not permitted. It must be a flat fee, which meant that it meant that local authorities are somewhat hampered in trying to encourage waste prevention when there's no direct financial stick, if you like.
Right.
I think one of the projects we've worked on where we might not have mentioned it, suggested straight away, was the Southeast Europe project. And at the moment in Southeast Europe, the Balkan states, they're pretty much at the start of their waste management journey, as it were. They're 5% recycling, if that. They've got a huge amount onto fly tipping. And pay as you throw does, as you can tell, put some direct cost onto the consumer. And if that is put in too quickly and there isn't much of a cultural understanding of what it's all about and how to adapt to the change, and people will flight it. They will put the waste in their neighbour's bin, or they will chuck it in the river at the bottom of their garden. So what is really important to do is make sure there's adequate levels of regulation in place, so inspection of communities and this sort of thing. There's an interesting use of social media in Slovakia where people were getting fed up with lots of fly tipping, and there was some local entrepreneur created an app where you could take a picture of your neighbour fly tipping waste, and then it would geotag it, and then the authorities could look at it. And it was almost like a sort of naming and shaming type approach, and had some pretty good impact in certain locations. So yeah, it needs with all these economic instruments. If you go too high too quickly, you will get very likely to get some perverse consequences. So they have to be staged right. They have to be at the right level and over the right time horizon.
These days you could also tag faces in Google Plus and Facebook. So I think that's a good technology which will help there. But Chris, you were saying something.
Yeah, I mean, just on the fly tipping there, if you look at items that might be more frequently fly tipped, like mattresses or some items of furniture, for example, this could be a case, again, for extended producer responsibility, and actually for the customer paying upfront the subsequent disposal costs. So when you buy your new mattress, if you pay then the cost of its subsequent disposal at the end of the life, that could go into a fund, so that when you come to replace it, you actually get a bit of money back. So if you imagine that you've already paid for the disposal cost, so you get a free pickup, or even you slightly overpaid for the disposal cost, you get a free pickup plus £10 back. So that's going to give you that incentive to do it. And what that does, that means that the material quality is maintained. It makes mattress recycling a more viable option, because you know that there's going to be a certain amount of high quality mattresses in a sort of concentrated form to allow these new, more circular business models to be developed. So, and same with furniture, you pay the disposal up front. You then avoid the incentive to throw it into the river because you'll be throwing money away.
Yeah, totally. And so we're actually out of time now. Tim, do you have any concluding remarks, and then we'll go to Chris?
Just that I think the discussion today just shows there's a real range in economic instruments that work in all different parts of the waste management sector, from the production all the way through to avoiding disposal and incentivizing recycling, and they're very effective. They can be very effective, and people definitely respond to price signals. It's very clear that, and governments should really be considering them more so than they are now.
Right. Thank you. And Chris?
And just to expand or to consider the application in a much broader context, if we are going to move towards a more circular economy, we want to think about how we tax things. So we want to think about moving tax away from things we want more of, like jobs, and towards stuff we want less of, like pollution. So shifting that burden. You could imagine if there was a tax on primary resource extraction that you knew was going to go up by X amount each year, that in itself would spur creativity in the use of recycled content, and it is a value to those goods. So I think we can focus small, we can focus on plastic bags, on coffee cups, but we can also look at the much bigger picture and think about the price signals that we're currently faced with and how we might want to realign those.
Right. I think that's a very important point, and I think that's something that we'll probably try to discuss later in the theme, or maybe next year. But thanks for pointing that out. And so thank you very much for joining us today, Chris and Tim. And for everyone else, thank you for joining the panel today. And the next panel, coming Wednesday, will be on changing consumption, changing lifestyle to mitigate climate change. And on Tuesday, we also have another panel on Brexit, and we'll have Dr. Adam Reed and Stephen Wise talk about Brexit and its effect on waste management. And on the panel on changing lifestyle to mitigate climate change, we have Carl Zimring from Pratt Institute and Elisa Shergodsky from Zero Waste Consulting and Education. So thank you, everyone. Stay updated by following us on social media so that you know when the next panels are and how you can comment or put questions to us. So thank you again, and have a good day, good night, and good evening. Bye.